Okay, so we're reading for comprehension. Journalists have labeled President Joseph Robinette Biden as a geriatric egotist. Biden is running for public office. The media has bludgeoned President Joe Biden while claiming to help the Democratic Party. So, how does a loyal Democrat openly criticize the current leader of the United States? The simple answer is bandwagon appeal. Since every other journalist criticized President Biden, the others jumped onto the scrutinization wagon. Worse, this wagon has not met its destination. In a magic trick, we call what the Democrats are doing to President Biden the prestige. They presented their most valuable part of the trick, but they pulled Biden into a dupe. In a chess game, we call President Biden a backward pawn because he is not protected by his own people. The word geriatric is used pejoratively, although being an elder person is not bad. Think about it. All of us, if all of us live long enough, we will be geriatrics. Yet Trump, 78, is close to 80. Joe Biden stumbled on some questions, and Trump only stumbled once. Yet Biden received the label of a geriatric egotist. Are egotists not allowed to run for public office? A line of presidents, including a Rough Riders member and a vivid racist who reversed promises made to African Americans and Mexicans, ran for office. Both won. One was impeached. One was the cousin of Douglas MacArthur. Yet, with fervent protection, trying to impeach Theodore Roosevelt would have been impossible. Andrew Jackson was impeached, but not before he caused the nation more turmoil. Wait 1 minute. The person running against President Biden was impeached. Once a person is forcibly removed from public office or impeached, the determination of whether a person can hold public office is the responsibility of the Senate. Therefore, Donald Trump may run for public office again. President Joe Biden was not tried for a high crime or a misdemeanor. Section 4, Article 2 of the United States Constitution clearly states counterfeiting, piracy, and treason is a high crime. Treason, by definition, is the betrayal of one's own country by attempting to overthrow the government through waging war against the state or materially aiding its enemies. According to the United States Constitution, 2 witnesses are needed to testify against the person who is being impeached. The prosecutors of Donald Trump's treason trial called over 25. Did we forget this fact? The Deputy Secretary's testimony resulted in the discovery of Trump's involvement during the January 2022 riots. Her resignation is an inference that she did not want to be included as an abettor of the Capitol riot. Fast forward to the candidacy for the United States presidency. United States citizens must choose between 2 people who are 80 or close to 80. Labeling one of them as a geriatric complicates the issue. If we examine notable people who have overcome obstacles in their 70s or later, we may see the label as absurd. Nola Oakes received her master's degree at age 98. Anna Mary Robertson Moses, known as Grandma Roses, painted at age 87. Pablo Picasso sculpted Afghan Hound 6 years shy of his 91st birthday. At age 85, Picasso refused money for his sculpture, a gift to the city of Chicago. Sir Robert Mayer performed on stage at age 100. Therefore, limiting people based on age can be unfair and untrue. A person is a total of years of tutelage. People can make informed decisions as centenarians, yet an 80-year-old was ridiculed for his age and for moments of forgetfulness during a debate with a formerly impeached candidate. How do we resolve the derision of a geriatric egotist? We must notice the people who ridiculed Biden. The derision came amid the panic of a Democratic Party constituents. The derision came among a group of Generation Z workers. Generation Z workers and homebuyers who are living below the recommended $60,000 per annual salary. Suggestion: the derision was a matter of Democratic fear and Republican terror. Many Democrats assumed Republicans would chide the party's members. Therefore, they one-upped the Republicans and asked for the Democrats' resignation from the campaign. If Democrats asked Biden to leave his campaign based on his past administration, the logic of Democratic fear might be aligned. Although the Biden administration enacted the CHIPS Act and funded the American Rescue Plan so that manufacturing jobs came back to America and a COVID-ridden society received free vaccines, criticism occurs. Yet criticism is based on a one-night show at a debate. Can we resolve the statement of a geriatric egotist? The journalists, the Democrats, and the daily headlines are riding this bandwagon. No matter how you slice this, Biden is a backward pawn. With the dogma, few people will want to vote for him, with the media slamming him. Whether his age contributed to his mishaps during the debate or nervousness, few journalists have written or eked these sentiments. Since one person spoke about his age, there is no new consensus. We cannot resolve the label once the label was written, and if we do, it may take another 3 months. Wait, 1 minute. The election is in 4 months. In general, the author's attitude is which of the following? When we begin our questions here, in general means for the most part, and the author's attitude is also linked to what is the main idea. And most of these questions mean the same thing: main purpose, major purpose, or usually they won't even say main purpose, they'll just say the purpose. So we're trying to get to what is the gist of why this article was written, what is the most important part, and what is the situation and what happened. So I ran these into each other, but anyway, is it that the author is optimistic that President Biden can win the election? Well, go back and read, and I'm going to show this and show these questions individually, but go back and read, think what that says. The author is warning people about the criticism of President Biden. That's a strong possibility, so I'm putting a check. The author is warning about voting for elderly people. This is okay about voting. This is ambiguous. Does author mean people who are going to run or voters who are elderly? And you need to look at that because that is a big clue that this is the wrong answer. Okay, warning about voting for the elderly is also kind of the opposite of what she's trying to say. Because what she's trying to say is, people really need to think about how they label people. And is the author demonstrating the effects of labeling people? So now we have like some major situations here with this. And go ahead, let's scratch out A because this is against what the author is saying. And we're going to go over this question. I'm going to show you where this is in the paragraph. So when you get ready to go through B and D, since we've, chosen two courses, she is warning, and Joe Biden would be specific. This is very, very general. The author is demonstrating the effects of labeling people. Well, is she talking about like the effects of labeling people because they're too skinny or too fat or too whatever label we give people that shouldn't go on? This is way too broad. So this is out. She's talking something very specifically, and we'll go over to how we can narrow this down and make sure this is the wrong answer. Okay, so it's D, so your answer here is B. Also, what does the author believe is the worst part of labeling a presidential candidate? Now, see how this is very, very specific, a presidential candidate, and specifically, there were only 2 presidential candidates she talked about here in America or in most countries. Usually it comes down to 2 candidates. So she's going specific. So when the author goes specific, you have to go specific here. The worst part of labeling is not researching the candidate's history. Did she get into researching? And did we go over the candidate's history? Wrong. That's out. The worst part of labeling is that most people believe the labels. That's a possibility, but we have to go back to how we can prove that. The worst part of labeling is that most people will start labeling, mislabeling the candidate. Stronger possibility. The worst part of labeling is that older people receive harsher criticism than younger people. Did she say that? Might be true, but guess what? Wasn't stated. She talked about older people who run for office, and it also gave an example of some older people like Pablo Picasso, Grandma Moses, who did some wonderful things when they were young. So stay tuned for the next slide. Okay, remember we said we were going to go over, or I said we were going to go over why B was the correct answer for this one, for the first question. Because the criticisms are straight every time you hear it. It's about President Joseph Robinette Biden. President Joseph Biden presented the most malleable trick. This is what happened to President Biden. And it got into 2 different people. No one else was kind of used here. We talked about the other presidential candidate, which is former President Donald Trump. We talked about a lot of different things. We also gave examples of some people who were impeached before and one who wasn't impeached. Okay, voting for elderly people. We got into what's going to happen to the candidates, but as you go back through, it didn't get into the voting for elderly people or the voting of elderly people or what's going to happen. And this word optimistic, of course, means that the author is hopeful. She didn't go that far. As a matter of fact, the author kind of said, well, if since every other journalist criticized President Biden, the others jumped onto the scrutinization wagon, and it hasn't met its destination, kind of means they haven't finished yet. And that's what she's talking about. Okay, so labeling people is too, as we had said before, it's way too general. Okay, let's go over question 2 because we did not answer that. Question 2, we left over, it was in between 2 different choices. We licensed down. Okay, every other person jumped on bandwagon appeal. It's what everyone else is doing. Okay, and everybody else is that they pulled away from Biden and he's not protected. Okay, and if all of us live long enough, we'll be geriatrics, both one. And I'm going to turn the page. We're going to go over how we can summarize it because basically these 2 are so close, they're almost the same. So we really need to be very, very efficient at how we're going to choose what happened. Okay, so this question number 2, it is one of the worst questions written because it leaves you out for ambiguity, but let's think about how we can answer it. Okay, We were talking about specifically a candidate. We were talking about how journalists have labeled them. And the worst part of this is this was separated when I put a slide here. By the way, this was separated, and these words were separated, but I copied them in a specific way so they're not. So a lot of words run together. Anyway, I'm sorry. But anyway, the others jumped onto the scrutinization wagon. So when they jumped on the scrutinization wagon, that means they started mislabeling. Okay, but here's another thing. People will start believing the labels is yet another part. Okay, so this is like an intense question that doesn't have to be this intense, but is. Okay, the loyaler. The media has bludgeoned Joe Biden while claiming to help the Democratic Party. Democrats are doing to President Biden what we call Democrats are doing to President Biden the prestige. Okay, they left him as a backward pawn. He's not protected by his own people. That's another part. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now we're between B and C, so let's look at all of this that went on. We went over this. So they left him, President Biden, kind of hanging. Okay, with the dogma, few people will want to vote for him with the media slamming him. Okay, and then it talks about how do we resolve the label once the label was written. May take another 3 months. So it's not that most people are mislabeling him or the candidate. That's not the worst part. The worst part is most people are going to believe the journalist. They'll believe the labels. So again, your answer is B. Let's go on to the next slide and let's see. What sentiment would the author agree with the most? Okay, we have to go back to everything we saw, what we read when we were doing. Mislabeling has hurt other presidential candidates. When we talked about the other presidential candidates, we talked about one who was impeached and one who had, not according to everybody, but according to the author, a kind of like checkered or mislabeled past. So this might be too broad because there's no evidence supporting this. And you can play back and reread the whole essay on your own. So there's no evidence for A. So A is elections are rigged due to journalist comments. This is just what people put on standardized tests. You look at this word rigged, you think about the trick that the person asked you when they talked about the prestige and how they're set up. But election rigging is usually when people who have a little bit more power than some journalists, or when a group of people get together and change what would have happened according to the numbers. And the speaker didn't go this far. The speaker talked about how people are going to pretty much kept it labeled, so this is too broad. The speaker talked about how people feel about what they hear and how most people are not going to support the candidate because there's been too much negativity said against him. Okay, so this goes too broad. Election rigging is kind of like you change, you get false people to show up. You take people who are dead and take their number, put it on a false ID and pretend you're the person, and all of that's kind of like election rigging. Okay, most elections are run fairly. This would be too broad, well, even if you said something like that. But did they get into the running of elections? No, they didn't get into running of elections. It was running of people. Okay, not of elections. So C is out, which leaves us with D, which goes back to the statement that said with the dogma, most people will not want to vote for the candidate. So the answer here is D. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, our email address is below.